The federal government has announced a suite of measures aimed at supporting Canada's auto industry, an industry hit hard by those U.S. tariffs. First, the government is scrapping the electric vehicle mandate brought in by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government. It would have mandated all vehicle sales to be electric by 2035. Instead, there will be stronger emission standards for vehicles with the goal of making 75% of vehicle sales electric by 2035. And to encourage those sales, the government is sweetening the pot with a $2.3 billion incentive program. Canadians can qualify for a $5,000 rebate when they buy an electric vehicle and $2,500 for a plug-in hybrid. Now, the vehicle has to cost less than $50,000 unless it is Canadian-made or be from a country Canada has a free trade deal with. Now, the government also announced a $1.5 billion fund to help build more charging stations and another $3 billion fund to help the auto sector diversify to new markets outside the United States. We're going to go through all of that with Mélanie Joly. She, of course, is the Minister of Industry, and she joins us now from our Toronto newsroom. Minister, thank you for making the time on a busy day. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, David.
I know the Prime Minister today, when he was outlining a lot of these measures, said the goal is still to get to a zero tariff situation with the United States on autos. But if Donald Trump persists on the path on which he is going, and we don't end up in that space, what would the auto sector look like under this plan, should it all have to be implemented to fruition?
So I think that a lot of auto workers have been asking themselves that question. And I've been receiving also a lot of that question today while we're unveiling the plan. My point is in 2025, we've been reactive. We've seen and experienced, all of us across the country, the unpredictability coming out of the White House. In 2026, we have a plan and we'll put it into place. And so what is happening in the auto sector is, obviously, we're in a trade war, 25% tariffs against our auto workers. But at the same time, there is a revolution that is happening where there are many, many, many new technologies that are being developed. And by 2035, David, we expect that 40% of all the auto market in the world will be EVs. So while the U.S. administration is taking its own decisions regarding the auto sector, we need to make sure that Canada is a place where there is progress, where we invest in technology, and that we can be that jurisdiction, that market in North America that is actually embracing change. And in turn, what will that make? It will make us a very strong competitor to build the right cars, not only, yes, for North America, and not only obviously for us in Canada, but also for the world. And why I say that is we cannot be hostage of our geography. We cannot be only dependent on what the U.S. is doing. We need to make sure that also, well, we have the best auto workers in the world, the best auto plants in the world. We've been the most productive, we have the most productive plants in the world, that then this strength that we will harness will help us export around the world. Because let's remember, Canada has 51 free trade agreements with the world.
But the company mix that's here now, like with Donald Trump trying to pressure the big three to move their production entirely to the United States, if he persists with this agenda and you can't get to a favorable tariff regime with the U.S., are we talking about the Korean companies coming in, for example, and displacing that? I mean, what sort of corporate mix do you envision if you can't get the resolution you're seeking with the United States?
So we're talking with different companies, obviously with Korean car makers, obviously with German car makers, but also we're looking at and we're having conversations with Chinese automakers. And so we believe that we can create these jobs across the country. And right now, as we speak, let's all remember, we have two really important major battery plants that are being built. So the one in Windsor by LG Stellantis that is now hiring and, has been hiring 1,500 people, and they're going to get to 3,000. And the other one that is being built as we speak in St. Thomas in Ontario, which will be hiring 3,000 people. So that's good news. Obviously, there's been a third shift cut in Oshawa. There are Ingersoll in the GM plant is now closed, and Brampton Stellantis has been closed. We don't accept these positions. We want to make sure that not only will we put really a lot of pressure on these automakers that are cutting jobs, we will invest in those who invest in us, because Volkswagen is investing, LG Stellantis battery plant, and Honda and Toyota have been increasing their production since the beginning of the trade war.
Right.
And now at this point, 77% of our car production in the country is Japanese made. Well,
Japanese companies. I got you.
Japanese companies.
Right.
So that's why we will work with these players. We will support Honda and Toyota. We will support Ford, who's investing a lot in Oakville right now, and the plant will be coming up to fruition, because there's lots of changes and investments being made, and the new shifts will start again this summer, and we will attract new investments. That's our goal, and that's my ultimate priority.
Okay, I know how you just said you were very reactive in 2025, obviously because of the disruption to everything coming from the United States. That's led to some movement on policies. The electric vehicle mandate, that was the pursued plan to get to EV adoption, is gone now, and you move towards strengthening vehicle emissions.
Yep.
Why is that a better path? I know the auto sector didn't like the costs associated with the EV mandate and the credits they would have to buy, but this is less ambitious in terms of target and emissions reduction, 75% as opposed to 100%. Why is this a better path now?
So, you know, for a long, long time, the GHG emissions standards were aligned with what was being done basically in the US. What we're doing now is we're going to embrace even more reduction of GHG emissions. Our standards will be much more, I would say, ambitious, but we're aligning ourselves with what is being done in the EU. And in the EU, they don't have EV mandates. And actually, electrification is happening. And so our goal is to really get to a place where we're reducing our carbon footprint. That's our goal. But also we're embracing the technological changes that are happening in the sector. And so, while before it was the policy was much more linked to the sale of EVs across the country. Now we're putting the onus much more on the car makers, on the auto manufacturers, to get to standards that are really, really ambitious regarding emission reduction. It can be different. It can be done different ways, David. It can be done through obviously EVs, but maybe hydrogen or other technologies that automakers will be developing. So it's another way to get to actually the same objective. Okay,
but so to qualify to buy these zero emission vehicles, the EVs, let's focus on that for a second because the hydrogen ones are still aspirational. You can get up to a $5,000 credit, $2,500 if it's a plug-in, but vehicles must be from a country that Canada has a free trade deal with, so not the Chinese-made vehicles that you're bringing in, and it has to be under $50,000 unless it's made in Canada. But there's only one completely electric vehicle that's assembled in Canada that we can find, and a large majority, right, and a large majority of the other models are over 50,000. So explain to me how this is going to work when the made in Canada options are pretty narrow and there aren't that many vehicles that are necessarily under that price range.
Well, we know that basically the RAV4 is going to be eventually plug-in hybrids, and good news because Toyota is investing. We are confident that Honda will be investing more. Obviously, the Dodge Charger will be covered by that, and that is being done by Stellantis, also in Windsor. And we want to see more of that. That's the goal. And meanwhile, for the other cars that are being built in Canada, we also have the Strategic Response Fund, which you alluded in your introduction of $3 billion, because obviously we will help the companies that will continue to invest in Canada.
So that's to help them change over, say, product lines and assembly lines to switch to electric vehicles that might fit the ticket for what you're incentivizing here.
Or, you know, it's been very interesting what is going on in the industry worldwide, but particularly in Canada. How CEOs are talking to us and also union leaders talking to us is how can they profit from the fact that we have so many free trade agreements. Never before did I hear a CEO say, you know what, we'll start exporting to Europe, we'll start exporting to the Middle East. Why not export into Latin America? And the trade relations are being reshaped as U.S. protectionism is just going ahead. And so that's why when you hear the Prime Minister in Davos saying, you know, middle powers will work together, concretely for auto workers, what does that mean? Well, they will be building either in Windsor, in Alliston, in Woodstock, Cambridge, Oshawa, Oakville, cars that maybe years ago were absolutely going to the U.S. And that will continue. But now they will be building for the world. And so they will be sending these cars elsewhere. And so what is then really important is that because we're not only operating in a North American reality, we need to be extremely productive. And we know we can be because our auto workers win year after year the prizes for the quality of their work. But not only that, we have to be extremely how can I say, we have to be at the forefront of the latest technology. Right. And so that's why also we're presenting this strategy. And you know what? When thinking of this and working obviously with the Prime Minister and my team, we were looking at Canadian history in automaking. And it's not the first time it has happened. In the 80s, a lot of plants from the Detroit 3 were closing. I'm from Quebec. I still remember when the Sainte-Thérèse GM plant closed, and some of my family was affected by this. And what did the Mulroney government at the time did? They brought in the Japanese automakers. It was a big thing in the 80s, but you know what happened? Nearly 40 years later, they're now doing 77% of our production, and in 40 years, they've never did a massive layoff. So that's why we want to invest in new players, and we want to support those who are supporting us.
Okay, so Minister, just one last thing I want to touch on with is there's money set aside here to look for partners to build out the charging infrastructure across the country, because range anxiety is one of the challenges that people have when buying a vehicle. It's going to take years to scale that up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, who knows how long it will take. And over that time, the incentives, the subsidies to buy the electric vehicles will go down. So why are these out of alignment, that the incentives to buy decrease over the period of time where you're scaling up the charging infrastructure to a level where Canadians will feel comfortable buying electric vehicles at scale?
And that's a fair question. So there's two things. I think that first and foremost, yes, we believe that we can have a major project across the country of EV charging stations. And you know what? There are Canadian companies that have done that in Europe. And I'm obviously thinking of a great Canadian company that is called Couche-Tard, that is called Circle K, and that has stations across the country. Whether they would do that in Canada, it would be great. The other thing also that is really important in your question is, for a long, long time, we've been working much more on the demand of the sector. We want to work on the supply. And people need to be able to have access to cheap EVs. And that's why we're bringing also in 49,000 Chinese cheaper EVs. But also, I'm in discussion with these companies to make sure that they build in Canada. And we think that we can attract investments, build EVs here, and eventually, within the next 3 years, we will be able to have made in Canada cheaper EVs. And of course, it will be aligned with our incentives going down. So that's the idea.
Okay. Mélanie Joly, we've gone over time. This Industry Minister Mélanie Joly, we appreciate you joining us today.
We usually do,
we
but that's
do.
fine, Dave.
All right, thank you, Minister. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Conservatives, they are not applauding today's auto announcement. They say it doesn't go nearly far enough.
Rather than scrapping the damaging EV mandate, the Liberals have effectively reintroduced it under a different framework. The new standards will pressure the Canadian manufacturers to produce 75% EVs by 2035, which is only a modest change from the previous 100% requirement under the original EV mandate. While the government's announcement for worker support programs is welcome, and however well-intentioned, it does not create new Canadian jobs, and it does not fix the underlying problem.
So what do automakers and auto parts makers think of the new auto strategy? Here with me now is Flavio Volpe. He is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Flavio, good to see you, sir. Just wonder, what was your thought there to the reaction from the Conservatives? Is that what do you make of that assessment of the plan rolled out today? That hand gesture tells me what exactly?
The opposition's got to oppose. I get it, but they missed the point here. It's not the equivalent of 75% EVs. An EV mandate dictates that to get to a target, these companies had to make EVs or plug-in hybrids. They got no credit for reducing carbon with more efficient internal combustion engines. Ford making pickup trucks with turbocharged 4 cylinders and 6 cylinders brings the carbon down. And if the objective is the outcome of reducing carbon at the tailpipe, and I'm looking at a great car here on TV here, a Canadian made vehicle that we put together that is zero emissions and that the technology is there. If the objective is to reduce carbon from the fleet, then what a GHG target does over an EV mandate is to say to the automakers, you've got to reduce tailpipe emissions by 57%. But if you've got hydrogen technology, if you've got standard hybrid technology, if you, in the mix of vehicles you make, figure out that in some cars you're going to have a more efficient internal combustion, and in some cars you'll do EV, it helps. And for parts suppliers in this country who employ 100,000 people, who are 80% of the indirect employment as well, we don't decide what cars the car makers make here. And we're chasing Hyundai, who is focusing on hydrogen. There's no hydrogen fuel cell vehicles on the EV mandates, but there's zero emissions. So we have to do better.
Okay, so to continue with the car analogy, you've just been given multiple paths to get to a destination with this. It's more optionality, but you've been pushing for the end of this EV mandate, for the federal relief. So now that we've seen it, and with the replacement, where does that leave the sector, in your view, in terms of its ability to withstand the financial pressures that are there today and over the next 5 to 10 years, say?
Well, what was very important is that the EV mandate, as it was set up, was going to put the manufacturers in this country, the ones that buy supplies from the companies I represent, that employ people that in most cases Unifor represents, they were going to be in a position of having to pay penalties of up to $3 billion, and with nothing in return, at a time when Donald Trump has managed to make our exports in vehicles drop by about 25%. So we're getting hit by about $10 billion of less revenue. By the way, take another $3 billion out of the equation. These aren't charities, and they're not state-owned companies like the Chinese. They're not here for market share. They're here because they have to show profits to their shareholders. I wish we had a Canadian car company that can make home team decisions, but we don't. And so the suppliers that apply all the AI, additive manufacturing, advanced metallurgy, today got a boost in their partnership from the federal government.
So
And I'll say this: the difference between an EV mandate that focus just on the supply side. Hey, by the way, if you don't meet the target, we're going to punish you. This new system says, okay, we're going to help the demand side. And there's a $2,500 incentive for plug-in hybrids, and there's $1.5 billion for charging. And it's going to put a lot more Canadians in EVs, and the industry is going to have a shot at selling cars to them.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about that because, when they brought in the EV mandate, they got rid of the incentive. Now they're getting rid of the mandate, they're bringing in the incentive, right? So they're kind of been out of alignment. But it's $5,000 for full EV, $2,500 for plug-in hybrid, but it declines over time. And I just asked the industry minister about this. The incentive to buy goes down as the incentives to build charging capacity goes up. So is there a misalignment there with the growth in charging capacity and the higher dollar incentive to buy?
No, and frankly, the industry bears responsibility for some of that. What we said to the government was, look, the need for the incentive is going to decrease as more vehicles come online. There's 115 vehicles that are plug-in hybrid or full electric that are available to Canadians right now. When the Ontario government, which was one of the first to come out with a rebate in 15 years ago, there was $14,000, but that's because EVs were Tesla Roadsters and Porsche Spiders. Now, what we do know is that the launches over the next 3, 4, 5 years are going to be in segments that are affordable. And there's gonna be lots of cars that are in the $30,000 and $40,000 that are EV or plug-in hybrid or hydrogen fuel cell. And so, what those buyers are going to really want to know is that they have confidence in charging. We're going to have less need for an incentive. And frankly, it's also a challenge now to the provinces. If there are provinces that think that it's not enough, they're more than welcome to ante up.
Like Ontario, for example, if you're investing big in EV battery plants, that could be a choice for you. But look, I know there have been concerns about the entrance of Chinese-made electric vehicles into the marketplace, even though it's on a quota system, sort of limits its upside. They are excluded explicitly from these incentives. In fact, no incentives will go to any country or country of origin car that doesn't have a free trade agreement with Canada. So non-market economies are out of the picture here on that side. That seems like a clever move to deal with some of the concerns you and people like Brian Kingston and Alana Payne have raised.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm joined by two prodigious Canadians who thought that wouldn't be a good idea to give $5,000 a vehicle purchase on the 50,000 Chinese vehicles that have no Canadian content, no Canadian labor content on them, that are state-owned. And I'm happy that the Prime Minister put that filter in there, but that filter is also a reminder to Washington, who a lot of commentators around the president who tried to, I guess, rile him up last week said Canada made a free trade agreement with China.
Yeah.
No, it was an agreement in principle.
Yeah.
And it's a very good filter to also deal with countries like Vietnam, who are good trading partners. They're in the TPP. Their VinFast would qualify for these incentives, but it's now an example to other countries like Indonesia or countries in Eastern Europe who are starting to be assemblers like Turkey. Even though they're not the adversary that we consider the Chinese to be, they are an interesting place if you wanted to funnel cars into Canada and the North American market from. So I'm glad that we have a filter that says,
Yeah.
if we free trade with you, then you're in the club. If we don't, maybe you want to try to negotiate better terms.
Yeah, we've seen similar issues with steel and transshipment of dumping and different things like that to get around the quotas. But look, one last thing, and I kind of ran out of time with the minister to talk about it, but they floated this idea of a tradable credit system to reward companies that produce cars here in Canada. So essentially, if car company A manufactures in Windsor, as they scale up, as I understand it, they get credits for that production that they can sell to a company that builds in Europe or Asia to sort of as a cover charge, I guess, to get into the market, so many units, and that rewards them for scaling up. How do you see that getting implemented, and how effective do you think that could be in terms of, rather than like not paying a tariff barrier, you're actually rewarded and given a market you can cash in on for growth?
I think it was a smart piece of this overall strategy. It wouldn't be something that could hold up all the objectives. But, take, for instance, Toyota, that manufactures 500,000 vehicles here every year, and they import about 300,000 or 400,000. This is a company that, as an example, is a net benefactor to the Canadian auto sector here, raw materials and workers. Why wouldn't you give them some credit to be able to sell those credits to Nissan or Hyundai, who
Right.
make great cars, but they don't invest here? But also to turn around to say to those companies like Hyundai and Nissan, Canadians love your cars. Let me help you make the business case now, because it's going to be a lot tougher for you to sell to Canadians, because we're going to bet on Toyota, Honda, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, who are here,
Right.
and Volkswagen, whose batteries are going to be made in St. Thomas.
Yeah, it functions like a tariff in some ways, but it goes to the companies instead of to the government. So it's almost like the emissions trading systems that we've seen. All right, Flavio Volpe, always appreciate it. Flavio Volpe with the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association.